Hey everybody, the government is shut down, but Hour of History continues on. This is the first episode of a brand new year and the same old delicious Hour of History. Today's podcast is brought to you by Audible. Get a free audiobook by going to audibletrial.com/Hour of History. That's a free audiobook. So you sign up for the free 30-day trial, and then you get to choose your own book to listen to, which is great for people who are commuting or just trying to get some good information, especially based on that last post I made. But anyway, so head over to audibletrial.com/Hour of History. Hopefully you listened to our last episode with a bunch of other ways that you can support the show. As always, we have show notes for you at hourofhistory.com, and you can subscribe at hourofhistory.com/subscribe. This week's guest is James. He's the producer of Hour of History, and I think you'll find this an informative and enlightening step toward figuring out how podcasts are made, what kind of work goes into it, how you can start your own podcast, and how episodicnetwork.com is going to bring brilliant podcasters together. Enjoy this wonderful episode on Hour of History. It's our world, anytime, any place.
You're listening to the Hour of History podcast.
Our world, anytime, any place.
With your host, Stephen Bauman, and producer, James Auble. The Hour of History is a member of Episodic Network, an association of fun, interesting, and informative podcasts. Episodicnetwork.com. Without further delay, your Hour of History starts right now.
Hello and welcome to Hour of History. This is a special episode to ring in 2019 where you get to go behind the scenes and figure out how the Hour of History podcast magic happens. We have James on the show. What's up, James?
What's up, Stephen? How you doing?
Good.
I'm not used to being on this side of the podcast, but let's do it.
It's kind of weird. We've gone through, 55 episodes and it's almost like you're just in a different realm.
Well, I am quite in a different realm in the sense that I'm on the other side of the country. And,
it's amazing what technology's done for us. And that's
the other side of the country and the other side of the podcast. But we found a way to reunite this Christmas. That was cool.
Yeah, that was pretty cool. It's always good to be to California and just see that there's another side of the world, another side of the country. But I'm now back in the East, and Hour of History is going all over the place. So hopefully you can take us through how some of that happens, because I know it seems like getting a podcast now is like getting a business card, and everyone seems to have one. So yeah. Tell me, how did you get into podcasting, the podcast world?
Well, I have to give you credit for introducing me to the idea. I think I could be wrong. We've been going on about, I think it'll be 2 years in January. Well, it is January. It's just turned January here. So yeah, I think it was about 2 years ago that you messaged me with the idea of, I don't know if it was first starting a podcast or a blog, but it was about, you wanted to do something with history. You wanted to publish. And I think it was either you or me who put the idea out there that we do a podcast with the both of us. And we did our first episode. I think it was January, about 2 years ago.
And but you had been already a seasoned podcast listener, yes?
Not so much. I listened to a few podcasts. I had a job in San Jose, and I live here in Santa Cruz at that time. And I was listening to podcasts on my commute over the hill over to San Jose. And it was just a good way to pass the time while I was commuting. And then come a few months later, I was back in Vietnam, and you contacted me about, I think it might have been doing a blog. And then I think maybe I pitched the idea of doing a podcast to you. So we did our first podcast, and I think I quickly realized that I was in over my pay grade with historical knowledge. I couldn't match what you were, the kind of topics you're touching on. And I said, I think you should go it alone or get another host to do it with.
Yeah, I think that was like funny too, because being so ambitious and thinking like that I could narratively do a podcast, I didn't quite realize, I knew how long it took to make a good lecture, but to make a good narrative podcast,
Yeah.
Like something like Danielle Bolelli's History on Fire, I mean, takes so much background prep. And so we moved away from the narrative podcast rather quickly.
Yeah,
but
yeah.
Okay, so what do you do? What is your step in making Hour of History happen?
Yeah, so after I kind of relinquished my role as co-host of the podcast, I think it was for the best, actually, because I'm really into computers, and I think I was doing a lot of graphic design kind of stuff at the time. And so I slotted right into producing. Almost without even a conversation with you, I just started designing our website and just doing all the stuff on the back end to make sure we had a good online presence and that we were, putting ourselves out there on all the different podcast mediums, like Apple and Google, and now we're on Stitcher. What else?
Yeah,
Tune in, everything else. So there was a lot of work just for me to do on the back end to make sure that we were reaching as many people as we could.
And I kind of remember on the first episode, the St. Patrick's episode, like you just adding like background noises because you were recording at a cafe in Vietnam.
Yeah, so I was at a busy cafe. It was about 7:30 in the morning, something like that. And I think I had taken the last seat at the cafe. So people were playing cards behind me. You can hear everybody honking as the traffic culture is there in Vietnam. Like, the honking your horn is like another pedal on the floorboard. They just it's like New York City kind of, or something like that.
Which is kind of fun in its own right.
Yeah, it was, but it is a nightmare when it comes to audio editing and trying to get out the background noise.
So like, what is that? So a lot of people imagine that I'm going to do a podcast now. I'm going to sit down and because there's a lot of like really awesome, interesting, bright people that I talk to that have great ideas. And they think, okay, I want to do this. And then how do you do it?
Yeah.
And it's more than just recording. How do you do this audio cleanup and stuff like that?
It is, but as we've found, it starts with recording. And I mean, if you don't have a good topic and someone who can talk, that's the most important thing. And without that, you won't get very far. But as we've also found, it's nice to have a little bit of equipment to actually come up with a decent sounding product. I think, first went out and bought like a $20 podcast microphone and hooked it up to your computer. And we're rolling. I mean, there's you send the product to me after you record, and I put it in my software, my audio editing software, and I try to take out the background noise the first thing. And then once I've taken out the background noise, I try to kind of clean up your voice a little bit. I have some effects that make your voice a little clearer and a little more prominent. So
it's basically like you're photoshopping my body, but it's
exactly. Yeah, that's exactly it. And then, I think I told you before, the actual effect that I use is called sexy voice.
and that's your effect, or is this?
No, that's my personal effect. I had read about it on a website, and so I reproduced it in my audio software. And somewhere on the website, they had said that it makes your voice sound sexier, so I just named it Sexy Voice.
And this kind of magic is true. We all think we sound weird when we hear our own voice, but that's something that you have to get over.
Hey, speak for yourself, man.
Oh yeah, you don't need the filter, huh?
No, I'm talking through the filter right now. I got the little, I forgot what they call it, little spit filter thing. I forgot what they call it, but.
So I was thinking, I was talking to a lot of historians today. I just started at the Holocaust Museum and
pop filter. That's what they call it. Pop filter. Okay. Sorry.
And this is with no pop filter where I'm talking with people. This is just regular people to people talking. And, we were kind of lamenting how historians have a lot of jobs. We have to do research. We have to do writing. We have to do teaching a lot of the time. And so everyone there was kind of lamenting that we don't know how to do these tech things that are incredibly valuable.
Yeah.
So how do you learn? Like you say, you start messing around with these things. What are some of the tools that you use to learn, how to be a podcast producer?
Gosh, it just came out of necessity. As the demand for me to know it came about, I just would go out and teach myself, just by Googling around, checking out Reddit threads about which effects to kind of, spice up your voice, make your voice sound better. YouTube videos. I mean, just being resourceful online really is probably about 75% of it. I have a background in music. I have recording equipment from when I was in a band when I was in my early 20s, and so I had like a good foundational knowledge of how to record stuff, dealing with acoustics, equalization, just kind of foundational knowledge. So I had a good starting place, but most of the rest of it just came from Googling around and trial and error. If you go back in our early episodes, you can see how we progressed in terms of the quality of the audio we put out.
Yeah. I love one of the things about creating a podcast that's kind of cool is that in its own way, it becomes a historical document because because we're creating history in the way that we're talking about the things that are, important to us at the time. And some of them disappear really fast. And then also with the technology and so on. But that's kind of interesting. So you did have a background and you had the vocabulary of things like equalization.
Yeah.
I mean, I could figure out what it means, but
just your bass and your treble, so it depends on where the person's recording. You've had certain episodes where you recorded in a kind of a more open room and it sounded a little tinny, like you're in a tin can and kind of had too much treble. So you go in and you raise the bass in a situation like that, or, it's a lot of trial and error, playing with different sort of virtual knobs on an equalizer and things like that. But it's fun to me, and I'm kind of glad that I switched to a producer type role because actually I think this is where I'm more useful and it's fun to me.
And that's why this is kind of fun for me because I've been asking to do this with you for a while because I kind of want to force you to explain how some of this goes just so you can get people can get some of the background information of the podcast. One of the coolest things about learning to sort of technology and how to produce a podcast is it seems like a lot of the information and the cool tips you get are just from the online podcasting community and just freedom of information.
Yeah. I'd really recommend anyone looking to start a podcast or someone has a fledgling podcast already and wants to get it, a little more tuned up. Check out Reddit's, I think it's just /podcast thread or something like that. You just Google Reddit and podcast or something, but there's a lot of kind of knowledgeable podcasters on there with good information.
And open to sharing the information if you just ask them for help, right?
Sure, yeah. And I use some audio software called Audacity, which is free and open source software, and it's great. It's really done everything I've asked of it since we first started, and I just want to give them a shout out because of the great work that team does to produce that software and distribute it for free. If you're like a new podcaster, I would recommend don't even bother with paying for Adobe Audition or any of the other paid for softwares. Just go straight to Audacity because it really has all you need for a first time podcast production and it really scales with you too. We're still using it 2 years later. I have no reason to switch.
And what would you say about the time it takes to work a file on Audacity? A lot of times Hour of History is, anywhere from 30 minutes to an hour-long conversation. How has that time it takes you to edit an episode changed over time?
Yeah, well, I've really gotten in a groove with it. Thanks to your consistency of recording, you were putting out 2 a week for a while. So I got to necessity is the mother of invention, or however that goes. And I just started realizing that I'd have to figure out shortcut keys and stuff to to edit fast enough for to keep up with your recording. So yeah, I go in and with your cities podcast that you did before, I'd have to cut out just little bits and pieces to make it kind of roll along smoothly. And I would definitely recommend anyone who's working with Audacity in editing podcasts, make sure that you figure out some shortcuts that work for you, because if you have to plot along throughout the whole episode and make lots of edits, you want to come up with a system that allows you to do all those things. There's repetitive edits quicker with the shortcut keys.
That's where computing is like, it's always been kind of funny to me, but this is actually a good tip for research for historians too, is you want to find the shortest, most efficient way possible to do things, which is a lesson throughout life that we're taught the opposite. Where like, if I'm training running, or in a sports team, it was always like, you're only cheating yourself. Every corner that you cut makes you a worse athlete. You got to go the distance, blah, blah, blah. Same with schoolwork, you need to, or violin, you need to practice over and over again. But this is all about simplifying.
Yeah. Well, and it's also about what your standard is, what you're going to be happy with. Like, if you think about it, it's kind of like cleaning a dirty bathroom. Like, you could sit there with a fine tooth comb and a toothbrush and scrub every single little granule out from the.
Did we have to use bathroom?
Sorry, the kitchen. Whatever room of the house. Like, like you can really take it to the nines and just really get in there. Or you just have your base level, what you're okay with, and you've made it harder or easier for me, like with the type of recordings you do. But, sometimes you don't have the luxury of choosing where to record, like some of your stuff that you took in Cuba. You were out and you ran into an interesting subject, and you wanted to have a conversation with her. So there's certain ones, and I would come back to you and I'd say, hey, I did the best I could, but I didn't want to, if I start taking out background noise, I take out her voice. So we just have to deal with it. And we've rolled with the punches and tried to put out the most kind of the clearest stuff we can. But yeah.
And I think we've done a pretty good job with that. The sort of consistency too is an important thing. So you mentioned, let's just take it step by step. The first thing that you have to do is have a good subject.
Yeah. I mean, you can have the clearest audio in the world, crystal clear quality, but if you don't have anything to talk about, then it's just dead air. So it sounds like common sense, but the number one idea I always get like pushed to me is, wouldn't it be a great episode if it were just me and my friends just drinking and talking about nothing? We're so funny to each other. Seinfeld did pretty well.
And have you seen Seinfeld? All episodes would be solved in 1 second if they just had a cell phone.
I think some of your best episodes were, you guys had some kind of like current event topic, or I think a couple of them were political topics, and you guys just sat around with a tall can of beer. I don't know if you stated that you were drinking on the show, but
Coca-Cola. Yeah,
Coca-Cola, right, because you're in your office. Edit that out.
Yeah.
Hey, me, edit that out. But yeah, no, I think just to be comfortable on air. And I think that was part of the progression. That's going to be part of the progression with any podcast, is just like still kind of feeling comfortable once that red recording light goes on. And I think you can hear throughout the progression of the podcast, not only did our editing get better and the audio get clearer, but you started kind of really feeling at home in front of the microphone. And I think it really like shines through in the newer podcasts we're putting out.
Yeah, and I think it's going to only continue to improve, but it is kind of one of the funny or like surprising things about the podcast is like I've had like some really great guests, and I'm always surprised like when people who are so outgoing in regular life, you just stick a microphone in front of them and then they get the like shaky voice. And it's like, what the heck is this? Like I don't understand. So yeah, that's definitely a challenge, and it is a sort of intimidating thing to sit in front. So anyone who's starting, I think it's a good idea to just like fool around and listen to your own voice. How often have you done that?
Well, I do record our little intro bit if anyone's put two and two together and recognizes my voice. Yeah, I've done little recordings for our podcast, so I'm used to listening to my voice. On top of that, I did like some broadcast journalism stuff while I was in college, and I did like a couple of like live radio shows on AM radio and stuff. So it's pretty familiar to me. But yeah, I mean, I always remember this story from a public speaking class I had in college where there was like an older gentleman in the class, and he got up and he said, "I'm so nervous to speak in front of you guys right now." He said, I routinely do raids on people's houses where I have a shotgun loaded and you know, I've often had people pointing guns back at me, and I'm nowhere near as scared then as I am right now to speak in front of all of you. And you know, it's just like, it may be a passive form of public speaking, but hosting a podcast and being on the air is you're putting yourself out there a bit. So
yeah,
no surprise that some people are a little apprehensive about it.
Yeah, I think it is. Yeah, and then what's the best feeling doing a podcast is once you get them beyond their apprehensiveness, and you know, the world can start to really kind of hear who this person is. Yeah,
sometimes they turn out to be like, you know, the most interesting guests. You know, once they get past that. What do they call it? I heard it called somewhere like a emotional filter. Once they get past that emotional filter, they really shine, and you know that you find that they have a lot to talk about.
And this is like one thing too you find out a lot with students is depending on the group in which they're working. So if they're talking in front of a class, some kids do really well, and some do really well when it's in front of a group of 5 to 10, and some do really well when it's just one other person. You know, and there's no laws about it. It's just different.
Yeah. On a funny note, I happened to watch the episode of The Office yesterday where Dwight has to do some public speaking. And Jim thought it was a fun prank to give him notes from Mussolini's speeches and to tell him to pound the desk. And by the end of it, he has like the whole crowd roaring in applause. And
yeah, it's scary about that kind of thing, and like especially.
Hey, can that be my recommendation for this episode?
That episode?
Yeah, that episode of The Office. Gosh, I can't remember what The Office.
You can't do a recommendation like halfway through the episode. That's not. I'm the host here.
What if I forget it?
Well, no, you won't forget it because I won't forget it. I won't let you forget it.
Put a pin in that.
Put a pin in that. So you seem to draw a lot on these the formative years you had in this like ancient art of broadcast journalism that most people ignore now. But it taught you some good lessons. Do you find yourself drawing back on that period frequently, like AM radio? Is it so distant from podcasting?
No, I mean it's broadcast. We still broadcast. We syndicate on our podcast mediums. We broadcast. It's not all that different. You're in front of a microphone. It's not live, but you know, I don't know. Maybe soon, at some point down the road, we'll do some live stuff. But yeah, sure. If I had I not had those 2 radio shows that I did, yeah, I mean, you learn that. I think I learned in those shows that having everything scripted, it just doesn't work out that way. You know, the best way to do a show is like to have some idea, some framework for how it's going to go down, and to let some things just happen naturally. I think I think it was the first radio show I did, I had it all like scripted out word for word. And it was terrible while I was following it. It was just rigid, and I just didn't feel good, didn't feel right. And I think I was kind of sounding like a robot. But once I went off script, I think it just got a lot better.
Yeah, for sure. I think the eyes start to glaze over.
Comfortable. So however that goes down, whether that means you have a cup of coffee with you, you have a beer with you, you got to feel like.
Or Elon Musk and his illegal herb with him that was totally legal, and CNN freaked out anyway.
Yeah, how much did that cost him? Millions? $1 million or something? From a fine from the SEC?
Yeah. And which the SEC, by the way, we're recording this a day before the SEC is shut down. They'll be shut down tomorrow at noon. So by the time this because of the government shutdown. By the time this episode comes out, there will be the SEC shut down too. So
yeah, see, this is a reason why I'm not a co-host anymore, because I have no idea what's happening in the world a lot of the time. I find out like 2 weeks later, so our shows would be just like full of me going, "What's that about? What's that about?" And then you having to explain it the whole time.
Well, but I think that's like it's almost kind of necessary now with how fast things move. And maybe you can talk a little bit about that too. We stick to like every week it comes out.
Yep. Every Saturday morning, we try to have it out by Saturday morning. If not by Saturday morning, by the afternoon.
Which even still, like for this example, we're talking about something that's going to happen tomorrow on Thursday, and the episode won't be out till Saturday morning. So like, who knows what could happen? What do you find in that process frustrating or good? Or should podcasts be released live like a sort of Joe Rogan thing? Or do you find they need a little editing? A lot of people are shocked when I say that we don't really edit anything out of our conversation.
Yeah, I'm actually shocked too. I can't believe how little I edit, but I guess that really speaks to like how comfortable you are on air. So in how you keep a good pace when you're doing your show. So, but back to your question, I don't know. I mean, it depends on the content and the timelessness of the content. So I think some of your topics have been on historical things, and so recording on Wednesday and publishing on Saturday when the topic happened 200 years ago, it doesn't make a difference. But back when Matthias was recording with you, and some of your topics were a little more current, it makes a bigger difference. But I don't think we've really had anything where like you said something bold on Wednesday and then totally contradicted yourself when like when something the opposite happens on Friday and then you're back on air next Wednesday. Nothing like that has really happened so much yet. I think that it might be because we're not on all that up to the minute of topics, I think.
Right. And I think that's a little bit better for podcasts. Like the ones that I tend to listen to for sure are talking about like longer term trends. And if they're podcasts about like discussions or conversations, they're about conversations that could last for a long time. And such as like putting out a podcast, how to put out a podcast. What we're talking about today will be relevant to people for a long period of time. So after you've done the editing and the podcast goes out on Saturday, take us through that process. How does it go from editing to publishing?
Yeah, there's a few different like services where you can that you can use to host and to publish your podcast. We use WordPress and a plugin called, what is it called? Blue something?
Blueberry?
Blueberry, yeah, is that it? And with that Blueberry plugin for WordPress, we just put in the MP3 file URL, and they create a RSS feed, which is used by all the different services to pick up our podcast. There's also ones called Podbean and Libsyn, and those are more like those are designed for podcasts specifically. But I've just heard worse and worse things about those services, that they charge too much and that their services are whack. So I recommend the way that we did it, and to just get some web hosting and set up a WordPress site and just publish through WordPress. I think that's the...
Now, when you're talking about web hosting, that's different from like Namecheap. That's the domain name, right?
Right, yeah, that's the domain name. You don't have to get a domain, but it just kind of makes sense to. It's really cheap. I think, we only pay like $10 a year or something. And it makes it easier for everyone to pull up your stuff. So,
and what about hosting?
With hosting, we go with HostGator is the one that we host with. I don't know if I recommend them over the competition. They work all right. We had some issues back in the day with where the site was really slow and it would drop off a lot, but they've kind of cleaned up their act. So I'm not going to trash them on this episode. They've done us pretty well in the recent year or so.
Yeah. So you need a host, you need a domain. WordPress is like accessible to everyone, and they have beautiful themes, right?
Right. Yeah. Go to WordPress.org and you can download it. It is a little technical how to install it, but if you're not so technical yourself, just get a friend. It's fairly easy to anyone with any kind of tech experience. And yeah, it's free to download and install. Blueberry, the plugin that we use for podcasting, it does have a paid service, a paid tier, but the free tier works just fine. We've been using it for 2 years now, and it hasn't really let us down. So I recommend that. There's an alternative. I don't remember what it is, but.
And Blueberry, like, that's part of what's responsible for getting it out to every.
Right. That creates Blueberry provides us with the RSS feed, which is what Apple Podcasts and Google Podcasts, Stitcher, TuneIn, that's what they need to be able to pull all your information about your episodes in and to make sure that they get updated. They get updated through that RSS feed.
And then what can you tell us about just networks and social media and things like that? Something that hopefully Hour of History is going to improve on.
I can tell you that we need to do better. But me and you, I think neither of us has like a particular affinity for social media, but and we don't have much of a taste for it either. But I mean, it's how you get yourself out there these days. We got to do better, but I've just started posting pictures and stuff on Instagram and stuff like that. And it's nice to be able to get the feedback from people on social media. I mean, not many people are all that familiar with posting comments on WordPress. It's just not. A lot of people go to the WordPress sites and they don't even know that there's like a comment section at the bottom. So it's good to have these social media presences so we can get feedback on how we're doing.
Yeah, and it's amazing. It's something that I noticed just recently is how easy it is to do things like leave comments and just have conversations on Twitter. Yeah. In fact, just the other day I got an invitation or a message on Facebook as someone saying, "Hey, why don't you listen to my podcast? And then if you like it, you can leave a good review, and I'm going to listen to your podcast."
Oh, that's cool. Yeah.
And that's like I've found like there's a real sort of community around podcasts.
Yeah, that's what actually I'm really trying to tap into that. I'm creating a new podcast network, as I've been talking to you about, called Episodic Network. And the basic idea of it is that it's a website, episodicnetwork.com, where podcasts can join, and we mention the network on our show and they mention it on their show, and through that intermediary, people can kind of find out about like-minded podcasts. And but there's so many ways to put yourself out there. We've also started kind of posting stuff on Reddit from time to time, and we've got some. I think we've gotten some upvotes there.
Oh yeah, and it goes out on History Pod List on Reddit. And
cool. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's like one of those cool networks that just shows you how many people are doing different history podcasts. Like there's really something for everyone if you're into like Chinese history or whatever. So there's pretty much something for everyone. How do you see Episodic growing?
I just see it as it's free. It's a free way to put yourself out for more eyeballs to see. And, I'm hoping to get more people on board. If you're a podcaster out there listening right now, head over to episodicnetwork.com or you can email me at james@episodicnetwork.com and we can get this started. But yeah, it's just, whatever medium through which you can put yourself out there. We do this for free, but, we love to hear things back about how we're doing, and we love to reach more and more people. That's why we do it. And any tool to do that is something I'm interested in.
And one of the more famous ones among the academic community is the New Books Network, which it was started by this professor who wanted, basically to give professors an opportunity to be interviewed. But you have high host variability where almost anyone can be a host. You just have to follow certain criteria. So you get wide variety of quality between hosts. You get a wide variety of quality in sound recordings, and almost all of them are conducted remotely, sometimes, with quite a lot of background noise. So that, to me, kind of like, it's a great model because there's new episodes by the hundreds out every week. But at the same time, it's like this Wild West where there's no flow of info. It's just like, there's just so much stuff.
Yeah. I think for our own podcast, I try to draw the line at, is the quality of the podcast enough so much that I don't need to turn it off, that the background noise isn't too bad, that the host like stays on some semblance of a topic, things like this. So I would say that at least my line for who I would include in our network would just be, people who have at least some basic baseline of quality that they aim for. So, where they're considering what their listener has to deal with to get to the kernels of information that they're putting out.
Do you think we're going to get to a point where there's too many podcasts for one person to possibly listen to? Or are we already there?
They'll weed themselves out. I mean, I think that the good stuff will rise to the top. There's already, podcasts today are pretty much just like blogs, how blogs were, whatever that was 15 years ago, where it was just everyone had a blog, and
what happened to those blogs?
They became like noisy social mediaers, But
they stopped blogging, right? There's a lot of people just stopped writing.
I think the barrier to entry for podcasting is a little different because you have to sit there in front of a microphone, and you kind of have to set up the logistics of your website and how you're publishing it. Sometimes some people opt for paying for services. We do. There's a slightly more barrier to entry than just setting up a WordPress blog on WordPress.com or something like that, which is free. You can do a podcast for free, but you can't do it with such the kind of fervor as even we who are a pretty small podcast. We've had to break the free tier and enter into the pay a little bit of money so that people can reach us tier.
Yeah, and it's kind of amazing how it's like almost all things in life, the amount of investment that you put into it, sort of, you get the double returns on it.
Yeah, it's mostly about time and effort. We don't pay very much to do what we do to publish Hour of History, but I'd say, it's more about the effort you put in, the time it takes. Early on, you and I were reading about how to make our podcast successful, how to get out there to people, what people kind of were looking for. And one of the main things, the common themes we'd see was consistency. So that's why we try to, at Hour of History, we try to put something out, every week. And then we try to have topics that people are going to be interested in and be regular with our publishing dates. So we've hit that Saturday morning, I think, almost every week for the past, I want to say 6 months, if not more than that. I think we have a record. A streak going for quite a while now.
And I've heard that most podcasts, almost all of them, never make it beyond 10 episodes. That's sort of the cutoff of if it's going to survive or not. Because
I think a lot of people have that idea. They just get that idea. Hey, let's start a podcast. And they realize, it's a couple weeks later now. I really just wanted to talk about a few topics, and I got them out of the way, and I don't know what I'm going to talk about anymore. But, so it is a task to always be thinking about it. And, you and I go back and forth on Instant Messenger, just knocking around ideas and stuff like that. It really takes at least for us, we're brainstorming constantly. We're shooting down ideas. We're proposing ideas and stuff like that. It's got to be that way.
Yeah.
And you taken at least with some level of seriousness.
And to a level 2 of where you're not afraid to shoot down a stupid idea or not, like.
For sure. Yeah. It helps to be with a friend or somebody that you're comfortable taking some constructive criticism from. Would you agree with that? I mean, that's
Yeah.
I'd say that it's a big, because when it's a creative endeavor and you
Right.
put yourself out there and you make yourself vulnerable, but through that kind of relationship, you're going to get the best stuff.
And I think of it a lot about it in the same way of the writing process. Like, you wouldn't just sit down and just write and then publish it, or you're going to get a really terrible blog. Like,
Right.
it's really embarrassing kind of to share your writing and then just have someone tear it apart. And, you really have to lay yourself out there. But once you do it, your writing improves so much.
Yeah. It's different from blogs in the way that blogs can be like an iterative process where you got like 3 drafts before you end up publishing it. But it's more like with our podcasting, our drafts are live. So, our episode 1 through 20 was like, the early drafts of what now kind of rolls out a little smoother now, in terms of the format, the quality of the audio, the quality of the guests that we choose, and everything else.
Yeah, and I think too, again, back to playing the violin, it's kind of like that. Everyone signs up in 4th grade if you're lucky enough to have it in your public school, and then they play for 5 or 6 years, and then they get to high school just about when they get to next level and they quit. Or they play through high school and then they don't go and take it to college and they quit. And then 10 years later, every single person who quits regretted it.
Mm-hmm.
Because they didn't see the progress, because sometimes it's so small. And for me, it's frustrating too. Sometimes, I want to have guests and people, I love having guests on, but people feel like because it's a podcast, they can cancel. It's not like a work meeting or something.
Uh-huh.
And though, you have to get beyond those every single week, all the time.
Yeah. I think, well, they're, like other creative endeavors that people undertake, it's like you can get disheartened along the way easily, I mean, especially if, things aren't going to go as planned. You're going to have guests fall out. You're going to, you have those moments where, at least I do every once in a while, where you go, geez, what are people going to like this? Geez, what am I doing? Is this,
Mm-hmm.
but then, you remember what made you do it in the first place, that you had a passion to publish something, and you thought, and you were confident you had a good idea, and, but that goes with all creative things, at least that I've undertaken. You have those moments of doubt and stuff like that. But I mean, I think that you see our resolve, because it's almost 2 years now, and we're still having fun with it. I think that's the main reason, it can get you through all those moments of self-doubt, or, have fun with it. And I think you and me, like, fortunately, you and me have had that kind of same guiding principle, where it's just like, we're having fun all the time. It's not like we're not drudging along with, oh, I have to edit this again, or, oh, I have to re-record this part. No, it's not. It's, I think that.
And I think a lot of that, I don't know, maybe you'll agree or disagree with this. I think a lot of this good training comes from being a musician. Like, you can see when a musician is not having fun, and you can hear it in the music, and you can feel it in the music, and it is the most terrible thing ever.
Yeah. It shows. It shows right through the microphone, through the interwebs, out through people's speakers, and that's why, like, I almost want to say, like, if this is an episode about, like, anyone interested in doing a podcast, like that should be one of the top principles that you set when you set out to do your podcast, is make sure you're having fun with what you're doing. That really goes with, like, a lot of any kind of creative endeavor, but it's like, without that, all those bad moments, all the drudgery that goes into, I mean, it takes work, just like any publication, it takes work to get it to its final phase, and to
and you
publish ready, and you got to have fun with it, man.
You really got to remember too, like a lot of people will come up with this brilliant idea, and when they're kind of pitching it to you, like you can see the passion behind it and you can see what they want it to become.
Yeah.
And
So you give it a chance, you know?
yeah. But to remember that and to sort of rekindle that along the way is really hard to do.
Yeah. Well, like I often think, like, if you don't care about it and you can't, I don't see your passion about it. Why should I be passionate about it? You know? And I think that's pretty common amongst listeners, viewers, you know?
And so what is does this programming work in the same way? Like I imagine it would be much more frustrating if you keep trying to do something and then the result doesn't come.
Computer programming?
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess I hadn't really mentioned that's what I do sort of on my other job. But yeah, I mean, it can be, but definitely it's that you have to have fun with it. And you know, at least at my level of computer programming, not many people, I don't get many eyeballs and positive, any kind of feedback, because it doesn't reach many people. So I have to it's got to be kind of fulfilling, just doing the work, and which it is. Hour of History is kind of a different type of thing, because Hour of History, I'd say, is not as demanding on, like, intellectually on me, but it reaches people, and it's more of an art, where programming is more of kind of grunt work.
Grunt work, but it's still ultimately satisfying and gonna give you something in a while. Yeah.
It's a different kind of satisfying, but it is, yeah.
Interesting. And so does the programming change what you can do for Hour of History, or do you see them as separate endeavors?
Kind of, yeah. Well, I do web development, is my other job. And so, no, it's very much helped me contribute to Hour of History with it, to put up the website, to know about how like online networking works. I also have a little bit of background in like web design and graphic design, so that's helped with doing some of our branding and things like that.
Yeah, it's kind of funny. I think people like, I don't know if Dr. Alvarez mentioned it, she may have, but a lot of times people are trying to separate things like teaching and research, saying, you know, oh, why not just have a research position, or why not just have a teaching position? And some universities do that now, but the overlap in, like, even podcasting and lecturing, I'm much better lecturer now that I've hosted a podcast.
Yeah, I think you can walk and chew gum at the same time. I think like people are expected to be able to do, like, have a little bit of a tech aptitude these days, you know? I mean, like, you were telling me how much time you sit on you're in front of your computer typing out stuff on Microsoft Word or whatever, and, you know, like, hell, you're basically a typist, but in fact you're a PhD candidate, you know?
Yeah.
It's just
it was really funny when I taught sixth grade that I would type and, like, look at them while I'm typing, and the students their minds would just be blown, like, because they were still kind of learning how to type, and, you know,
you're just like fingers running a million miles an hour on the keyboard.
Yeah, because I used to have to type, you know, with an open book whenever I'm citing or quoting someone. I'm looking and reading the book and typing at the same time, and it's kind of like, we used to sort of teach typing in school, but now typing is just something that is learned.
Yeah,
because
I didn't explicitly learn it. I just
Instant Messenger taught me.
Yeah, exactly. I think somewhere. No, I take that back. I think I had a typing class that told me where my fingers needed to be at the stationary position or whatever.
Yeah. Longest word you can type with one hand. Stewardesses.
Oh, nice.
All left hand if you're typing right.
The U too?
Steward. There's no U in stewardess.
Oh, how do you spell it?
STEWER.
Oh, okay.
RE. I don't know.
Yeah, I rely on Google to fix my spelling, so I probably would have tried a U.
That's another favorite joke I like to use when I misspell something up on the board because I've forgotten how to spell. I just draw a red squiggly line underneath it. And every student immediately recognizes that. And then it gets like a half of a chuckle half of the time.
Yeah. So when you make mistakes in Spanish, do you do an upside down one? Sorry. Okay.
That count violation. Okay.
Yeah.
Good. All right, James. We're getting towards the end of the episode. First, I want to ask if there's anything else you want to mention for aspiring podcast hosts.
No, I think it came out in our discussion. Have fun with it.
Number one. Give me a top three. Number one is have fun.
Number two, pick a topic that you can get some juice out of.
Juicy topic.
Yeah, just make it about something, that you're really interested in. I think that's gotta be in there. Something that's not just one episode. If you think that you could do a podcast because you have one idea for an episode, I'd say spend a little more time thinking about like episode 5 through 10. Think at least a few episodes ahead.
That's good.
Because as you were talking about people burning out, I mean, I think that's think a little bit ahead about how much milk you can get out of a topic in terms of episodes.
And number three?
Download Audacity.
Nice. And start that editing process. It's funny. Like I've messed around with Audacity a little bit here and there, and it just really sucks you in. Like it's super engaging. Like you get into that flow state, just trying to figure out how do I make this sound better.
Total flow state. I have a little shortcut. Hold Shift and scroll with your mouse wheel, and you can kind of scrub through the audio track like that. And I go total 100% flow state when I'm doing that.
Yeah, for sure. That's awesome. And whenever you're in that kind of state, you're having fun and life is working. All right, that's excellent. I'll be sure to publish that in the show notes. And now we're to the final part of the show, which is recommendations. You already gave us one Office episode, which someone is going to have to hunt down the episode number and name and blah, blah, blah.
Sorry about that. But you can just Google Dwight Schrute doing Mussolini. I bet that'll pull it up.
Yeah. And then they even had a kid did it at a graduation. I don't know if it was like a high school graduation. Uh-huh. It was definitely on the border of cringe.
Okay, one more recommendation. If you're a new podcaster out there, send me a message at james@episodicnetwork.com. And if you're a fun, interesting, informative podcast, we'd like to have you on.
Wow, that's great.
Mm-hmm.
My recommendation this week is to this kind of will sound self-serving.
Mine was too.
But yeah, I guess it is a self-serving sort of promotional thing. But it's also like a wholesome thing. My recommendation is, and this comes from my brother, is leave comments, leave messages. Like we think about it like, yeah, a lot of people, millions of people will leave messages and comments on like a music video that drops. Oh. But very few people are like willing to engage with maybe a podcast that you listen to regularly. It doesn't have to be Hour of History, but a podcast that you listen to regularly, and you just never thought of leaving a message. Like I know this is like totally random one, but I listen to Muay Thai guys, not every week, but I've never like dropped them a comment and just said like, thanks for your work. I've listened to it like a bunch of times. And I'm sure that would make their day. And I could even tell them, why don't you talk about this subject? So
random acts of kindness.
And and it's what keeps the world going. And then it takes 2 seconds. And then at the same time, like this is what, this is the fuel. In fact, over the break, I got a couple emails from students actually who just said, hey, I hope you had a great break. I really enjoyed the class. And I saw this, and it made me think of the class. And those messages are just so meaningful. And, they
keep you going.
Yeah, so good. So those are great suggestions. Thanks again, James, for all the hard work you do on Hour of History. Episodicnetwork.com sounds like it is going to be a great sort of community of podcasters.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. This was fun being on. And I will get this back to me to edit.
Yeah, that's a good note to end on. But wait, since it's like the beginning of the year, where do you see Hour of History in a year from now? 2020.
Yeah. Do you remember? Well, we weren't alive, but when they created that vinyl that they sent out with like that space shuttle that went out to Pluto to take pictures or whatever, and they had that like golden vinyl with like the world's most like I don't know, like emblematic type creations. Like there was like artists and all kinds of things on there.
Like a time capsule.
It was a time capsule. So I foresee Hour of History being on the next time capsule that goes out into space.
Whoa. Talk about a visionary, ambitious goals.
Ambitious much?
I like that. I see Hour of History as a partner with Neuralink going into everyone's brain.
Ooh, I like that.
How's that for ambition?
Diabolical.
All right. Like great. Thanks for being on, and right. We'll see you next Saturday on Hour of History, where it's our world, anytime, any place.
Goodbye.
Thanks again for listening. Make sure to check out hourofhistory.com/Rex for all the recommendations mentioned during the show. That's hourofhistory.com/RECS. And if you still haven't gotten your fill of the Hour of History, be sure to head over to our blog at hourofhistory.com/blog, where you'll find topics that were covered in the podcast as well as others. And that concludes this week's episode. We thank you again for listening, and we hope to have you back here next week at the Hour of History podcast.